Hi, thanks for tuning in to the Generative Work podcast with me, Sarah James Wright, exploring all aspects of future business and conscious leadership. So I'm delighted to be joined today by Anna Cappellini, a highly experienced communication strategy consultant and a new psychology student. And Anna and I worked together. We think it was somewhere around 2 years ago. We started a coaching program for about 9 months together. And Anna has very kindly agreed to come and turn the tables on me today and ask me 3 questions around working generatively. So welcome, Anna. Lovely to see you.
Thank you. Thank you. Lovely to be here. So, questions. Okay, there's something I've been thinking about a lot these days, these weeks, and it's like, of course, how life is changes for us as professionals, like working from home, working in our socks and Birkenstock, and not having this this layer of formality and these coffee breaks and all these routines. Also, the commuting, which made us able to transform ourselves into our social identity from our personal identity. So you have a good, I would say, oversight on these words because you are a consultant to professionals and organizations. So from the, how does it look like from there? How what impact this layer that has been taken off has on people?
Okay, that's a really good question. And I found myself slightly distracted at first because, I mean, you must be a witch. Literally earlier today, I was looking at myself wearing socks and Birkenstocks and thought, dear God, what has happened to me? And now you come on and ask me that. So, yeah. You're right.
Typical case of generalizing your personal experience and thinking that everyone is exactly like you.
Well, I am exactly the same. We're the Birkenstock sisters. So yeah, cool. I think lots is happening. And there's, as with anything else, we can explore it at the surface level and then we can kind of go deeper. But also, I think it's really important to acknowledge that in any event, any phenomena that happens, there are kind of winners and losers. There are some people who have benefited from these changes, and there are some people that haven't. So, for those of us with kind of professional lives that are easy to adapt, and we can sort of see benefits and think, oh, this is great because now we can do things like this. If you're a healthcare worker that's right on the edge, or you're a working mum who's trying to suddenly run a school as well as your job, or if you're someone that's lost their job, lost their business. So I think the first thing to say is that you can acknowledge where you are with this situation and that other people may have a really different experience. So for that, it's very hard to generalize. I think in terms of organizational life, for those that have been able to pivot, there's some really positive aspects to it. One, just recognizing that you can move faster than you thought you could move, that your team can actually adapt really quickly to a different situation. Organizational processes tend to be heavy and slow, and there's lots of, imagining and planning and testing. And so this idea, we've really been thrown into prototyping of just, well, chuck it out there and see if it works. So I think that's quite good for our creative selves. We're having to really meet an immediate challenge and bring our creative selves to the fore. And in that, part of the formality is gone. I'm glad to let go of the formality. I'm glad to be sat in my Birkenstocks. I'm glad not to have to travel up to London all the time. It's not great for me to be on Zoom, but I have been able to adapt, for me, for my work to Zoom. And like, from doing our work, it's a very physical practice. It's in physical space. That's a really important component of doing systemic coaching. And I didn't think that we could really do it well on Zoom. I mean, I've always done it for kind of clients in America and other parts of the world, but it's been amazing what can be done on Zoom. And something has been lost.
Yeah.
So for me, and I don't think this is just about me as an embodied practitioner, one of the things that we lose is the embodied data. So for me to tune into, a disembodied head, it's like all of my body is working so hard to read what's going on. Yeah. And so I think whether you're an embodied practitioner or not, part of the reason it's exhausting is because all of those antennae that we normally have available to us to tune in to some of the subtle clues about people, we're just down to this tiny snapshot. Does that make sense?
It does. I was thinking, like, for example, I'm a person who is very, in a job environment, in a working environment, I'm very much obsessed with privacy. So now basically I know the living room of all of my colleagues and friends and your own, and I mean, you can't unknow it, right?
Yeah.
You can't go back from here. And for some people, I think that formality is a way to cope with the professional environment. So I'm just wondering, how are we all going back to that? And because from a certain point of view, we just get into each other's.
See, I like that. Like one person.
Not always it's a free choice. So I'm wondering, do you think there will be a new sort of I don't know, issue to face when we will go back to?
It's a really interesting question, because I think we've worn the corporate mask, many of us, haven't we? And it's like there's been this kind of crazy magical threshold that when you step into work, you stop being a human being and you put on this professional demeanor and you leave a lot at the door. And one colleague mentioned to me, I've met so many kids and pets, and it felt really nice. And another client told me that she was on a call with a colleague and his wife just walked through the background naked. She was going off to the shower or something. And apparently she wasn't phased. I think she was Swedish or German, thank God,
It's normal now. After a while, I mean, all kids are the same, all pets are the same, and all
naked wives are the same. So there's something around the humanizing element of it. But it is such an interesting question about, do we keep our human status that we've gained when we go back? Maybe the genie's out of the bottle and we can't go back entirely to that really artificial environment. I mean, a lot of places are deciding to stay remote. So something a lot more flexible. I know a lot of people deciding to move to different cities and just carry on. There'd be even more digital nomads than there were,
About so many, not so many, but quite a few big CEO of international companies who told me in the past that they were against remote working because
no one will do any work. This is what they always said.
To mention, because I strongly disagree. But I have to say that I've been a little bit like this too in the past, because you feel that you miss control over what people do. And I was so wrong. And I was so wrong. I would like to call the people I didn't allow to work. I think I'm pretty much open-minded, but I wasn't as open-minded as I would be now, because I learned it.
I think, and I think that's true for a lot of people. We've learned what it is like. And for me, it's like I've got a dream to buy a place up in Scotland with a bit of land and, live in a much more remote place. And I was always unsure if I could do that and sort of be out of the city and still work. And so it's proved to me that, yeah, I could do that. Now it doesn't feel like the right time to move, but, it's given me a taste of a different kind of lifestyle too. And the other thing I'd want to mention about what the pandemic has done for us is this idea that we're all focused on the same thing at the same time. And I don't think that's ever happened in the whole of history before.
I'm going to write this down because attention is something I'm working a lot about, like consciousness and attention and not fragmenting your.
But literally, the whole world is focused on the same issue at the same time. And as I said, there's some people in the world who are getting an even worse deal from this. There's certain countries, certain parts of the world, certain sections of humanity. We know that part of the whole Black Lives Matter emergence is partly because the difference in experience for communities of color through this pandemic has really highlighted wealth inequality, social inequalities. So although not everyone's experiencing it in the same way, everyone's attention is focused on the same issue at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been pandemics before, there's been plagues, there's been wars, but not the whole world with the same issue at exactly the same time that I can think of.
Yeah, that's
what
true.
does that do for us? Does that develop our collective capacity to meet issues like global warming, which again, we have to look at all together at the same time, even though it doesn't affect all parts of the world equally. Some are much more affected than others. So that's a big ask, but I wonder about that.
So we are also all in the same boat, right? Somehow.
Well, we're not quite all in the same boat, though, are we? This is what I mean. Like some people are in a luxury yacht and some people are in a rowing boat with half
right.
an oar.
I think we, like you and me and our colleagues and our like small community around us, we are like closer to each other than we used to be. So I'm still thinking about organizations and companies. So like, and the new leadership models and the distance between an employer and employee. I mean, all these things have changed, and I think that they won't go back to the way they used to be.
Well, if we apply that idea of this kind of collective attention, if that is able to take root, and I don't think it has yet, I don't think many people are even conscious that that's happening, but if that's able to take root, imagine if organizations if the ideas weren't all at the top and then the manifestation of all those ideas wasn't at the bottom, but if there could be more kind of everyone looking at the same issue at the same time, what kind of creative solutions could we bring to what we're facing? I mean, that really excites me.
Yeah, true.
And as human beings, so the leader and the person at the top and the person who's like the newest or the most junior had some kind of equal value in terms of their contribution to that question.
I think it's a path which has been opened. It's an hard work to get there because someone won't agree about this. Because being labeled as the thinker give you privileges, and so it's a path toward democratizing the creative process.
Yes. And then maybe, seeing your boss in his Birkenstocks or, someone walking naked or, seeing people maybe something around that democratization is happening in our natural human experience that, as you say, we've peered into everyone's living rooms. We've seen into everyone's homes.
Yeah. And going to the office, sitting on a chair and be pretty is not be pretty, be elegant, look good,
look the part. We don't need to
Not
do
enough
that now.
anymore. I'm not saying that it was enough before, but now it really doesn't matter. So what matters is what you do, and
Yeah.
this is not to be given for granted. I know that it looks like a more like a older style theory, but there are still so many companies where just you being there in a certain
Yeah.
way, superficial, has a value,
Yeah.
and I would be happy that this stopped.
Well, we'll see. And, you're right. It's like people where they still expected to be there 8 hours a day, whether or not they're productive in that time. It's just, no, you've got to be in the office for these
No,
amount of
they are
hours.
not there as well. Even if you might think that it's a privilege to just sit there elegant and get salary, deep inside is not a good thing you're doing to yourself. So
Yeah.
maybe it's good that you can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
Because why?
Yeah. And then there's also, there's always the flip side of it. For some people, work is a welcome escape from home if home isn't
Oh,
great.
yeah.
And so there's a lot of also social disadvantages for people when they're trapped at home in, less than positive environments. So I think we have to keep coming back to this isn't one experience for everybody.
No, absolutely. But imagine if the money of the office, I'm just saying, but if the money to keep these amazing offices would have been given to those who live in a studio or live in
Yeah.
a one bedroom with other two people
Yeah.
uh, to get their own studio in their flat.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's a completely different way of thinking business, I believe, which gives more freedom to people. And
Yeah. And I think the other aspect of it that I'd be really excited about. So I live in Brighton and there's quite a lot of kind of co-working spaces. There's a lot of, and in London too, now that's quite a big thing where people can just turn up, have the positive aspects of the work environment, but not be tied to it. And I think that's really exciting in terms of geography, that people exhaust themselves commuting. And it's super expensive. It's super unhealthy. I mean, I probably shouldn't say this out loud because I might jinx myself. I'm sort of touching wood as I say this. I haven't had so much as a sniffle in the last year, let alone COVID. And I think it's because I'm not on tube trains, squashed up against someone sneezing on me. And I'm
yeah,
much more
absolutely.
conscious of things like that,
If you're living in the countryside and paying like 1/3 of the rent you're paying in London.
Yeah. So there's these bigger movements have definitely been set off by this, and it remains to be seen. I don't think we can go back to how it was. And I guess it's up to us to think, well, how do we want it to be coming out of this?
So, what will you change about the way you used to work? Is there anything that made you reconsider, like I don't know, something that once you will have all of the options open, you will do differently?
Well, I think it was sort of already in the work for me, but not to be so London centric,
Mm.
not to think, London is where the work is. And also that you can do really good embodied work even on Zoom. I would not want to do that all the time. I miss working
Oh,
with
yeah.
human beings in space. And
Yeah.
there's lots of trainings and workshops and things like that we have not really been able, or we haven't wanted to reduce to an online offering. They're just going to wait until we can be back in real time and space together. But yeah, for me, I am one of the fortunate ones that it's been fairly easy to move to, working in a different way. So there's not, because it's been easy, there's not such a big thing to go back to. The main thing is traveling to London, even from Brighton, is not fun. It's a really unreliable line. It's quite
Yeah.
stressful and it takes a long time. I didn't even have to do it every day. I just go up to see clients as and when. But yeah, I think it's like London is not the center of the country or the universe.
And we can keep having our sessions if we want on Zoom, because you know that I don't like physical. I won't miss it that much.
Yeah, we'll carry on like this.
I will try and challenge myself.
Okay, cool. So, anything else?
I don't know. I don't know. I think that's, I asked you what I was curious about, and yeah.
So that's about the change in the pandemic. But have you got any questions about the nature of the work and what this kind of idea of being generative is, or how was it for you working in this kind of very different way from traditional coaching?
Um, yeah, actually, what I really would have liked to have experience with you is to work in a team with other people, because I think that for the future, this will be my challenge, to see how to put together the individual identity and the social identity when you are working together, and how to respect the individual identity more. So, what I mean,
Yeah.
I believe that you work a lot with this,
Yeah. Well,
and
let's do it. Just because we haven't done it yet doesn't mean we can't. Let's have a project where we work on a team together.
so how do you approach this? I mean, this like allowing individuals to be themselves, the best of themselves within an organization, and at the same time protect the rules, which are important, because let's be honest, I mean, it's some formalities is important as well.
I mean, I'm quite an informal person, but there are some agreements, there are some ground rules I do think that we need to agree to. So I guess they are the formalities. I think one thing I've noticed is there's a difference where an organization creates a kind of coaching culture, a coaching environment, so that it's not just the people who are perceived at the top who get the support to be their full authentic selves, because actually that's a value to the organization no matter where you are in the
Mhm.
organization. So I think that's one thing that helps, if that notion that we can be our best selves and bring our authentic self is spread throughout the team, throughout the
Yeah.
organization, rather than just a privilege for a few. That's one thing.
So you say if the leader is true to themselves, they can um, transmit it. No, how do you say? They can spread it.
I think to some extent, I think leaders definitely do influence culture. But then often it can end up being like, I've got a good idea and now I'm going to impose it, and this is how you need to behave.
Mm,
So if they really understand this way of working and really allow people to be themselves, however they are,
mm,
and really look for their strengths and support them to grow,
mhm.
and I think that some organizations do that, but kind of precious few actually.
Yeah, yeah,
And in a way, if we take a step back, that's partly because I think organizations are still looking at processes and deliverables, and they try to cut out the human element.
yeah,
But actually, unless we look at the human interaction within the process, we can't really develop the process itself.
yeah.
Because
Absolutely.
what happens is all the tensions, all the resentments, any disruption, everything just goes
Frustration.
underground. It just goes into that invisible layer.
Yeah.
And so when you come along and think, well, we'll change the structure, we'll change the rules, we'll change the direction, none of that makes a difference if the invisible part is still kind of not right, or even quite toxic, as it often is in organizations. So back to your kind of original question about, how do you do that? How do you do that for everybody? One, I think everyone needs to have a chance to be on a path to show up as themselves, because otherwise it just feels like it's someone else's world or it's someone else's rules, and I'm not really allowed to show up as me, or I don't really have a voice. And there's a lot of organizations that I'm sure you've met this, that they'll do ostensibly a listening exercise, but they're not really listening. There's still only a handful of voices that actually count, and they've just done it as a tick box exercise. So I think really to hear people, whatever they have to say, and just allow that to kind of sit in the air rather than react to it. Like, no, you're wrong, or be defensive, but just to let, it's all data. These are just pieces of the puzzle that you can create a picture with. So allow it to be there. And we've talked about the whole kind of contrarian view and how valuable that is. And I love that. I think if teams could embrace their mavericks a little bit more and listen to some of those voices on the edges of the system, not to dismiss them, not to try and narrow the band of normalcy where people are allowed to fit,
or
but to
use pink
extend that out.
lens or use pink glasses, right? Like this thing of like trying to see always, being optimistic is a good thing, but but sometimes really embracing the shadows, let things coming out in a safe environment, and with the goal of just building on these things. Sometimes it is much more interesting.
Well, yeah, and not just interesting, but more effective. It's more creative to
More
have the
creative.
shadow. Otherwise, it's a very kind of monotonal picture that we're creating.
Because we are
And
in a
things
world
get
of
missed.
yeah, because people think like either being positive or being negative, either being
Yes.
optimistic or be pessimistic. And I've been told by some managers like, but I don't want to think about the shadow because I look forward and I'm positive and I'm energetic and optimistic. And I answer, this has nothing to do with the fact that everyone has a sort of shadows and that you exist because you have a sort of shadows and
you can ignore it, but it doesn't mean it's not there.
Exactly.
And so it quite often corresponds with a kind of introvert extrovert dynamic as well. So the extroverts in a team take up more space. They're viewed as really positive. They can see the introverts as being more negative or quieter, or they're not contributing. And actually, again, it's like the normalcy has all gone up one end. And if you can allow people to have different ways of engaging, understand they're holding different pieces of the puzzle that you might really need if you could really genuinely let them in, then it's a fuller, richer, more creative, more adaptable, and more stable team.
Absolutely. And same happens for organizations and brands.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true, because brands often, it's really interesting when you see a brand deal with a difficulty.
A crisis, managing a crisis.
Yeah, or like really bad publicity. Do they own up? Do they try and suppress it? The ones that do best when they just say, yeah, we stuffed up. We're really glad we're genuinely going to do something different about it. And they'll retain the loyalty of their customers for their authenticity. Whereas you try and suppress it and you can smell it a mile off, can't you, that people are being disingenuine.
Yeah, true.
So for you, what have you been doing lately around this whole, because I know you had a whole idea about, embracing the contrarian. Are you still thinking about it?
Yeah, we are we are proposing workshops to companies in order to have a taste of what exploring the shadow and being a contrarian means. So in this workshop, they will have the chance to become their, like, I don't know, their customers, of their clients or their friends. They think they would have something against the brand, so their mother or whatever, and have a conversation, like build a script, a storytelling with this impersonification, and then give them back the bright side of these shadows that emerges. So we are asking basically the managers to forget what they are, to take a short holiday for half an hour or so and becomes contrarians.
I love that.
And this is like a little taste of what our offer is, which is based on qualitative research. So really getting in touch with customers who have something to say about the brand identity and its shadows. So
I
yeah,
love this idea. So this is exactly what we're talking about, isn't it? It's just
yeah,
hearing all the voices,
hearing all
not
the voices.
only hearing the ones that saying the things that you want to hear.
I mean, it's an exercise of divergent thinking, right? The
Mhm,
basis of brainstorming, divergent,
mhm,
right?
mhm.
And so
And I think there's an inner aspect to this as well, because what we're talking about, we frame it as radical inclusion. Everything belongs. Every voice, every person, every facet of ourselves belongs.
yeah.
But often, if we can do a bit more of this inner work about allowing even the parts of ourselves that we don't like or judge or dismiss or suppress to kind of have more of a place within us, then we've got a chance of being able to do that outside. And I think a
Exactly.
lot of the reason it doesn't happen in organizations is because the people within the organizations are so inhibited about their true self because of this kind of corporate mask that they wear.
And we are going back to the beginning of our conversation. So maybe now, this my hope is now that this mask somehow has been put on the table or a little like
Yeah.
further away. Maybe
Yeah.
it will go down on the floor and maybe it will break and we will be our true self and it will be more, I don't know, it will be easier to carry with us our faults and our imperfections and,
Yes.
and apply it to our brands and our organizations as well.
Well, I love that. That seems like a really good place for us to close, Anna. And I hope for that too. And good luck with all your future work, with your
Thank you.
contrarian workshops. Keep me posted.
Thank you. Thank
And
you.
your psychology studies and
Thank you.
and yeah, let's stay in touch. But thank you so much for today. It's been
Thank
lovely.
you. It was lovely. Lovely to talk to you.
Bye.
Bye.
So thank you for joining us for this episode of the Generative Work podcast. And what did you think? If you have any questions or comments, it would be great to get your feedback. And if you would like to come on and ask me 3 questions about generative work, we'd love to hear from you. There are links in the bottom of the description for the email and website where you can get in touch. We're looking to build a truly collaborative community for people interested in working generatively, so all ideas welcome. And we look forward to exploring another topic with you next time. Drop us an email if you'd like an update on our next podcast release.